There we go, recording in progress. All right, great. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for listening to me talk about Tuscany and Tuscan wines for a little bit. Tuscany is huge. Tuscany is a big part of Italy geographically, and also it's a huge part of Italy culturally when you take into account everything that's there, like the coast of Tuscany, and then you've got Florence and Siena and Pisa, and just there's so much there in Tuscany. And wine wise, you know, wine is a big part of that. There is so much there, and there's so much going on, and there's no way that we could like taste all of, even just to taste representative wines from each of these places and styles. It would just be impossible. So, but I picked out 5 very different varied wines. I'll run through them right now real quickly. So first up, this is Paterna. I guess I'll stop screen share so I can just, Paterna Il Rosso in me there. So this is just a Toscana IGT, but from a really awesome organic farm in Chianti Coliaratini, the Arezzo Hills out east of Florence. Then from there, we're tasting this, the Galegnano Il Rosso. This is Sangiovese from southern Tuscany down, like it's the Val d'Elsa, which is in between, it's down towards Siena, sort of, I think it's in between Montalcino and Montepolciano down there. That's Sangiovese. Then a little bit even more south, this is Tenuto Di Trinioro, Le Cupole. This is a super Tuscan, a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc from south of Montepolciano, basically down on the very southern border of Tuscany. Then we're going to taste the I Forestieri Girotondo. This is a Sangiovese-based blend from the Alta Maremma. So this is the coast of Tuscany, but up in the hills, and it's a bunch of like old sort of forgotten, abandoned vineyards up here in the hills, made by a pair of interesting new younger winemakers. And then Sanguinetto, Podere Sanguinetto, Vino Nobile de Montepolciano. Cool. Hello, Julie. From Montepolciano. So I actually hadn't even thought about it. Really thought about it. I don't even have a Chianti here for this, but you know, like I said, it is what it is. I could only fit so many different wines into here, and it's fine. A lot of these, there's a good reason why none of these are Chiantis. It's not that Chianti isn't good. There's plenty of amazing Chianti out there, but a lot of these actually come one, two. I think 3 of these all actually come from within the Chianti DOCG, but they are choosing not to bottle them as Chiantis for various reasons. So Tuscany is a culturally huge part of Italy. Tuscany has wielded a lot of power going way back. This is a statue of Romulus and Remus, you know, and the wolf that raised them when they were orphans. This is outside of the Boboli Gardens in Florence. So, you know, like Florence, the Medicis, Siena, you know, this was like one of the most important, powerful parts of Italy for a very long time, up, I don't know, I guess until the Napoleonic era, when Napoleon conquered the Italian peninsula, the Italian mainland, and Sicily, you know, stayed independent. But Napoleon conquered Italy, and then after that, then you had the Italian unification and stuff. But Tuscany looms really large, and Tuscany has always been. You had Umbria, what just inland and to the really just into the east, and then you have Rome to the south. Umbria was part of Rome. It was part of the Papal States. So a lot of the power and the economy and everything in around Rome and over in Umbria was all controlled by the church. Tuscany was never controlled by the church. Tuscany was always these individual sort of city states, princelings, whatever you want to call them, and a lot of the power was wielded by the mercantile class. So Tuscany has always been, for a very long time, Tuscany has been pretty affluent. And it has been, then thanks to the Renaissance cult, Tuscany has been a destination for people for hundreds of years. Talking about like hundreds of years ago, people would go on a European tour, and going to Florence was like one of the places you had to go. It was one of the stops you had to make. I think it was last winter, I was over at my mother's house, and she actually has a Baedeker's travel guide for Italy from, oh God, it's like the late 1800s. It's like 1880 something or something like that, and it's, a lot of it is about Tuscany. I found the chapters about Tuscany and opened up the map of Florence, and it's a guide to like different restaurants and hotels and stuff. And that's from the 1800s. My point though is that there's always been tourism, and there's always been a lot of economic activity in Tuscany. Wine has been a big part of that. There's always been a lot of people, a lot of wealthy people who wanted to have vineyards, who wanted to show off, who wanted to, like export wine, who wanted to like live on a vineyard. So the wine in Tuscany has always been sort of, in a way, more developed and more exposed to the rest of the international world than a lot of the rest of Italy. And I'm just gonna, I gotta move my bar here so I can skip ahead. These pictures are from spring of 2017, when I went to Italy for the first time with Matt Molo with Selection Naturelle. And the night before this, we were out in Bologna. Was it Bologna? No. We were in Modena, and we were out until 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that in Modena, drinking Lambrusco with the guys from Solicetto, and everybody was just horribly hungover the next morning. And we, the next stop of our wine trip was Florence, and so we went to Florence. And everybody else, they all went to this restaurant to have lunch and just sort of like sit and recover. And I was like, that's not what I want. Like, what would make me feel better to get over this? I am just going to go out and I am going to run up and down hills until I have like sweat everything out of me. And so I went and I ran like 12 miles up these switchbacks. I ran across the Arno and then just up the hills outside of Florence, and just ran up these crazy switchbacks. And it was great. It was beautiful. This is the road that I was running up. This was some little tiny convent that I ran past. But there you can see the Duomo in the background. I finally got up high enough that I could look out back at Florence down there and see it. And then I was getting to Paterno. But some of these, these are just, it's like classic. This is the rural countryside of, the surroundings of Florence. It's very, very well manicured. It's very well taken care of and pretty. They make fantastic wines all over, but it's, like I was saying, sort of like there's it's easy to make great wines when there's so much attention and so much interest and resources applied to it. So anyway, Chianti. Chianti covers a third of the arable land in Tuscany. Chianti is a huge place that, you know, goes from Florence in the north all the way down to Siena. It's like 100 miles from north to south. It you know, and it extends almost to the southern border of Tuscany, down, you know, down by the border with Lazio, all the way down to Orvieto. Not quite that far, but it's almost, which is crazy. Chianti was given DOCG status in 1984, and back then, I don't even remember what grapes you could use. I think you were actually required to use white grapes. Trebiano, Malvasia were in the blend of what you could use to make red Chianti. There's so many different, you know, little subclimates, exposures, soil types, all these different locations in that huge area that, talking about quote unquote Chianti, you know, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. And then, so that was 1984. Winemaking in Tuscany sort of went through a revolution in really the 70s. It was back in like the late 60s that, you know, there'd always been serious wine production in Tuscany, but back in the 60s, the Marchesi Antinori planted Cabernet Sauvignon at his estate in Maremma by Bolgheri, so close to the Tuscan coast, at the Incisa della Rocchetta, I think is the name of the estate, where he planted Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot on this sort of rocky, higher hillside, because, you know, like he was, you know, a wealthy Italian noble, and he was worldly, and he loved Bordeaux, and he wanted to have, he was in love with the wines of the Medoc and wanted to have wines like that. And there weren't really any vineyards around there in the Maremma, but he planted grapes, and it turned out that the wines were pretty delicious. And then his sons talked to Emile Perrault, the really famous professor of enology at the University of Bordeaux, and then also brought in a winemaker, Giacomo Takis, who had worked for the Antinoris and was a great winemaker, great sort of like by the book winemaker, came in, and he started making a wine there called Sassicaia. And in the space of like 10 years, you know, by like the mid-late 70s, people in the rest of the world, thanks to the fact that it was produced by, you know, the Marchesi di Antinori in, you know, outside of Florence in Tuscany, people had caught on to it, and people lost their minds and were like, this wine is amazing and stuff. And there was this explosion of interest. Other people started planting Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot to a greater extent. There had been a little bit of Cabernet and Merlot planted around in Tuscany. You know, it had been brought from France, you know, the intercommunication between, you know, people going back and forth between France and Tuscany. Tuscany is a pretty international place. In the Napoleonic era, the French coming through, stuff like that. So there was already Cabernet and Merlot here. And it was already accepted in some places like Carmignano, which is a really small appellation just outside of Florence here that grows Cabernet and Merlot. But there was a lot more interest, Sassicaia, and then other wines that people started making, because once Antinori was successful with Sassicaia, all these other wealthy people and, you know, nobles, people with estates in Tuscany, they all wanted to have some kind of fantastic, exciting super Tuscan too. You know, and so everybody started making up fantastical, made up names for their crazy wines, and, you know, charging more money and stuff. But it did put a lot of attention on winemaking in Tuscany, and it made people care about it, and it helped overall sort of raise the quality of what people were doing. but that, and well, okay, and I'll also talk about, at the same time, I should talk about Brunello De Montalcino, because that happened at sort of the same time. So Bulgari down on the Tuscan coast, then further inland, Montalcino, this old medieval sort of sleepy hilltop town, 30 miles inland from the coast. There was a family there, the Biondi family. I think they then, you know, married, connected, hyphenated their name. They're now the Biondi Santis, but they had been for, I think, generations making a 100% Sangiovese wine, aged for a really, like, fermented for a long time on the skins, and then aged in oak casks for a long time. I think they were doing like 4 years in the cask, and making these really powerful, made for aging Sangioveses. And nobody had really given it a whole lot of attention, but in the 70s, people started to just, you know, other people started tasting old bottles that they had. People started hearing about it. And at the same time as there was this super Tuscan, more attention on super Tuscans and winemaking in Tuscany, people started getting interested in the Biondi Santi wines, and it sort of got discovered. And so other people in that area around the town of Montalcino started capitalizing on that interest and making serious, you know, lower yield, more concentrated 100% Sangiovese wines, and that evolved into Brunello De Montalcino. So that sort of happened at the same time that, like, Sassicaia and the Super Tuscan movement was also emerging. And what that did was that it, you know, the prices of those wines were much higher than what you could get for Chianti. And it also, because Chianti is just this unwieldy thing. It's, you know, this massive area that produces wine. And the name Chianti basically doesn't really mean a whole lot, because you don't actually know what exactly the grapes are that go into Chianti, and you don't know. It could have come from up by Florence. It could have come from in the Arezzo Hills. It could be from down here by Siena. A lot of people in the Chianti zone started making other wines outside of the DOCG system to capitalize on this interest, and to, you know, make wines that they could sell for more money, that they could make more serious wines. And that, I mean, it was a good thing, because then it started to create the interest and the pressure to more specifically codify and create more appellations for all of these different things in these different areas. It also sort of, I guess I don't want to say that it stole the wind out of Chianti's sails, because there was never really a ton of wind in Chianti's sails, but Chianti, it helped push Chianti to being not a particularly serious appellation. All the people that are in Chianti that, you know, want to make really fine wine, a lot of them are also in other appellations like Chianti Classico or Brunello De Montalcino or something like that. And so they can just make that instead. Or if they just happen to be in somewhere that is strictly Chianti, they're probably just going to make some kind of super Tuscan. They're probably just going to make like an IGT Toscana, something like that, and put whatever name on it that they want, as opposed to putting Chianti on the label, because unfortunately or fortunately or whatever, people just associate Chianti, the name Chianti, with wines that are not particularly super exciting. Chianti is generally not aged for very long. It has to be primarily Sangiovese, but you can use other international blending grapes now in it. You're not supposed to use white grapes anymore. And really, kind of interestingly, that's actually why. So I'm pouring the Paterna now, the Paterna Il Rosso. That's actually why this Paterna Il Rosso is not a Chianti, because they use white grapes in it. I'm going to skip ahead here to Paterna. So then we got out here to Paterna. This was their garden. They were, why not? That's a nice picture of Paterna looking through this hedgerow. So those are the Arezzo Hills there. So Paterna is Chianti Coliaratini. I've forgotten now how many different Chianti subzones there are. I want to say there's 9 if you count Chianti Classico. Don't make me try and name all of them, but there's Montalbano, Fiorentino, Aretini, Sanesi. I said Fiorentino, Rufino, Chianti Classico. All right, that's all that I can remember. But anyway, there's all these different subzones. So Chianti Coliaratini is Chianti that is all the way in the east, getting into the sort of like foothills of the Apennines, the hills outside of Arezzo. So it's a little bit further from the ocean, a little bit higher elevation, generally windier, cooler. And I don't know, traditionally people didn't think a whole lot of it, but people there have started making more serious wine, more interesting wines, and also climate change has changed things. Being at a higher elevation with more wind is turning into more and more of an advantage these days. So this is a little farm that it was like a extended family, like polycultural farm that in 1978, the family that had owned it for generations, a lot of them had moved away. It was the Italian industrialization. So the family was ready to move on. There, not many of them were left living here. So they sold the farm, and they sold it to a group of friends from Florence that sort of wanted to like get out of Florence and go back to the land. And so they bought the farm as a commune and basically just kept on farming it exactly the way that it had been. One of them is actually a professor of traditional Tuscan, like agrarian crafts at a school in Florence. He's actually a professor at the school I went to, Lorenzo de Medici. So this land has never been farmed with pesticides. It's never been farmed conventionally. Kind of classic, dense Tuscan clay. Oh, hey, there's a picture of me picking pieces of it up and trying to crush it. And this was just about at this time of year in 2017. It was like the second half of March. Old Sangiovese vines here. Just walking around, looking at it. So this wine, so they make a Chianti Classico, or they make a Chianti Coliaratini that's Sangiovese with Canaiolo and Colorino, but then and that's primarily what they make. Along with, they grow all kinds of vegetables, and they make olive oil, and they, grow their own wheat and grind it and make their own flour for baking bread. They are really still a functioning polycultural farm, and they do a lot of social programs and stuff for people here in the community. But they make wine as their product that they can export, that they can sell, and actually make money to support the farm and sort of support this whole endeavor. So that's what the Chianti is. The Chianti is, I don't know, like 80% of their production. This Il Rosso, though, is Sangiovese with Canaiolo, Ciliegiolo, sometimes some Pugnatello, but also usually a little bit of Trebiano and Malvasia. So with this, the Il Rosso, they're really trying to make what they feel like Chianti used to be before Chianti got commercialized, and before people overproduced Chianti and made really like thin, unripe Chianti, and B, Chianti got real, famous, and people started trying to make Chianti Classico and trying to copy Brunello and making really, really ripe, dense Chiantis that were bigger and heavier. So this is 12.5% alcohol. It's just a really elegant, thirst quenching, easy wine that's always released young. I don't know that this actually spends any time in wood. I think this is all stainless steel and fiberglass. The fruit is pretty like vivid and exuberant. It's a little like black peppery smelling, kind of plummy cherry. Really nice fresh acidity, good tannin. It's a little tart. It's just really nicely structured, really fun, well balanced. It's both, this is thirst quenching and it's also structured at the same time. And it has this like dry tannic structure that's not too heavy or not too aggressive, but it just gives the wine this poise and sort of backbone that I really associate with Tuscany. There's a lot of different soil types around through Tuscany, but they're famous for galestro. Galestro is sort of a schist-rich clay that, I don't know, in my experience, sort of helps create wines like this. Yeah. So to me, this is not called a Chianti, but to me, this is, if I chose this to taste this, you know, for the seminar, because this is, to me, like what Chianti classically was, or, you know, should be sort of at its best, you know, like not aged very long. It doesn't have a whole lot of weight. It's not something that's like an intimidating wine, but it's delicious, and you can, you know, pair it with all kinds of food. It's like great, satisfying, fun wine to drink. And I feel like I've also got to say, so the woman here, that's Claudia, who was at that point the winemaker. She had come on, I think Marco, that's the professor of Tuscan crafts. I think she had met Marco maybe, I don't know, through some program, and then she had come out here and she had sort of become the, like, taken the reins as winemaker here. She actually passed away last year, so I know they're still going on and making wine, but I'm not sure what's, you know, how exactly they're doing. Anyway, I do miss Claudia. I'm gonna get out of those pictures, stop screen share here. Let's see. Okay, so next, 100% Sangiovese. So this is Galegnano. Val d'Elsa here, 100% Sangiovese. This is sort of another, I included this, I think, because this is a good example sort of like what's happening in Tuscany and where Tuscany is going. It's a little family winery that had never exported to the US before. Winemaker is Erica. She took over from her father. It's a 14-hectare estate. She took over in 2011. I think that they had originally sort of sold grapes off. I don't think they bottled a whole lot of wine, but Erica, you know, sort of saw that was the future and moved in that direction. So 100% Sangiovese. organically farmed, hand harvested, fermented using, you know, native yeast in cement tanks. And this is 2019 is the vintage of this. This is actually, we have some, but it's sold out, and I think the new vintage should be arriving before too long. So it's aged about a year. It's actually way fruitier smelling. A little bit like brighter, a little bit more like blackberry cherry. Where this comes from is definitely warmer, definitely a warmer region, lower elevation, closer to the ocean. But relatively similar winemaking, similar aging process, and a, you know, similar amount of aging between the two of these. Mm. 14% alcohol. It's riper. You can feel it. I get some like dried fruit on the palate too, like dried cherry. More tannin. Sangiovese is a great variety that's relatively late ripening, and you really kind of have to work to get it phenolically ripe completely, like not just get the sugar up, but to also get the tannins to sort of be ripe and mature and not too aggressive and stuff. And I'm not saying that because of this, because of the Galignano. Like, to me, the Galignano is well balanced, but with Sangiovese is, it's not a really big full-bodied grape variety like Cabernet Sauvignon or Syrah, but it always has, relatively to the amount of fruit that Chianti has, it always has relatively a lot of acidity and tannin. Classically speaking, sort of very broad blanket statement. I feel like no matter how much fruit you sort of manage to get out of Sangiovese as a winemaker, you're always going to end up with also a substantial amount of acidity and tannin, which is, it's just how it is. It's something that I really like about the wines because it makes them, to me, more interesting and great food wines. Kind of smells like cooked or roasted tomato as well, to me. And there's a little bit of like an aromatic spice, like basil, something like that there. A little aromatically spicy. Yeah. I actually have her Cabernet Sauvignon on the way, and I'm super excited to get that here. And you have to share that with people. All right. Oh, now I'm going to have to dig around and find more pictures. Let's see. When was I? 2018. All right. Back to screen share. Spring of 2018. I went and this was absurd. I I think I was there for 2 full days. It was something stupid. Once again, I spent more time traveling than I was actually there in Italy. I think I got to Italy, and then the next day, then I had 1 full day, I think, and then I left the following day. It was really, really absurd. But anyway, there was a big wine tasting at Conestabile della Staffa that I wanted to get to. But in the morning, no, maybe that was the next day. Okay, so I think I was there for 2 full days. So I spent my first night, I got there late in the dark, spent the night in the town of Montepolciano, where Vino Nobile de Montepolciano comes from. And then I really wanted to go and visit Tenuto Di Trinioro because I love the wines and I'd been working with them and stuff. And I had visited Passapisciaro on Mount Etna, the other estate that Andrea Franchetti has. And here I'm going to just stop screen share. So this is number 3, the third wine that we're tasting right now. This is the Tenuto Di Trinioro Le Coupole. So the first of the 2 days I was there, I headed over to Tenuto Di Trinioro down in southern Tuscany. And it's not that far south of the southern edge of Montepolciano, just not that far south of Acquaviva and stuff. So I went down here, there's a little sign for Tenuto Di Trinioro, had this awesome Abarth Cinquecento. And then I went and I ran like 22 miles or something. I did, like some stupid 20+ run out through the hills around Tenuto Di Trinioro here. And there were a lot of very picturesque things, a lot of that's right. Yeah. Like something happened to my camera and it started adding these lines to all the pictures I took. There we go. Then I restarted it. So Tenuto Di Trinioro, oh, that was nice. Tenuto Di Trinioro was created by Andrea Franchetti, who grew up in Rome. He had a restaurant in Rome for a little while. Then he worked as a wine salesperson in New York for like 4 or 5 years. Then he moved back to Italy. And he actually just passed away. Andrea Franchetti passed away end of 2021, like late autumn of 2021. On his mother's side, he came from a South Carolina textile fortune on his mother's side. His mother actually used to live up on Mount Desert Island. He has actually a lot of family here in Maine. Anyway, at some point, so his uncle, I think it was his uncle, was Cy Twombly, and the painter. And at some point, he had been given Cy Twombly had given him a painting, and at some point, Andrea Franchetti sold it, and then used the money to buy a whole bunch of land out here in the southern edge of Tuscany. And I don't know if he ever actually visited the land. I think he just might have bought it sight unseen, or he just liked the idea of it and bought it, and then he never visited it. And at some point, I think he burned out on life, on I don't know, partying and stuff. And so he came out here to this super rural, remote part of Tuscany to get away from everything, and totally fell in love with it. And decided that he wanted to do something here with this land. And he started planting vines because he loved wine. He knew about wine. He'd run a restaurant. He'd been a wine salesperson, importer and stuff in New York. He really loved Bordeaux. So he got cuttings, I believe, from Chateau Cheval Blanc, and started planting Merlot and Cabernet Franc and stuff out here in just super, super rural Tuscany. These are the hills up above. I don't think that's not the estate, but these are the hills sort of up above Tenuto Di Trinioro, looking down at the valley and then over at the hills over across there. More just classic Tuscan countryside, random towers. Hey, no, and then I found a sign. I was very tired at that point, and I was excited that I was almost there. All right, here's the winery now. Very clean, very modern. Lots of barriques. Aging bottles. Diastolic pump. So instead of having like a pumping mechanism, this is like a rubber hose in there, and then this thing goes around and just puts pressure on it, and so it like forces the wine through there without having to churn the wine at all. There's no like piston or impeller or anything like that. Super cool idea. Old vines, I forget what that was. That might be Merlot. It's mostly Merlot and Cabernet Franc that's planted here, but also some other unusual varieties from central Italy. Super high density, trained relatively low to the ground. I believe these were planted back in the 90s. And then that was, yeah, so that's, oh well. There we go. I'll hop over to this here. So Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon here. Eight months in French oak barrels that are a mix of 1, 2, and 3 years old, and then 11 months in cement. This bottling here is 15% alcohol. And I will point out harvest technique, 36 separate pickings from September 29th until October 28th. So they're both sort of like harvesting individual parcels of the vineyards, but they're also sort of harvesting vine by vine and cluster by cluster, looking for grapes that are really completely ripe. So they're harvesting pretty ripe, and they're also waiting. That's pretty late to be harvesting until the very end of October. The color of this is really, really inky. Le Coupole is like the, I don't know what to call it. Tenuto Di Trinioro, he makes a Tenuto Di Trinioro Rosso, which is the flagship, and then he makes a bunch of several other wines that are like single varietal bottlings. Le Coupole is the assemblage that, you know, embodies the personality, the terroir, you know, like what he's trying to do here. The Tenuto Di Trinioro Rosso and the other Magnacosta, the other bottlings that they make here are very expensive. And Le Coupole at approximately 40 something dollars retail is the sort of quote unquote affordable one. Dark, jammy, like it's like plummy, black raspberry. There's an aromatic spice, but it's so different from the two Sangiovese based wines. Still really nice tannins. So, I mean, it's still very structured. It's a little bit more lush, a little bit more, I don't know, international. But also at the same time, one of the things I love about this wine, this still tastes Italian to me. It tastes Tuscan. It has this dry, tannic backbone to it and acidity. It's, you know, this is Cabernet Franc Merlot and a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon. This blend is identical to a lot of Saint-Emilions and, you know, stuff that you would get from like Côte de Bourg and Blay and Côte de Castillon and stuff. And this does not taste like a Bordeaux. It doesn't. It's like more structured. It's drier. It's sunnier somehow to me. I just always really appreciated that about this wine, that this is a quintessential super Tuscan, you know, made by a literal jet-setting playboy, you know, but it like, it has terroir. It tastes like Tuscany. It still has that sense of place. I really appreciate that about this wine, you know, and I get the same thing from his wines on Mount Etna from Passapisciara. So pretty much.
Hey, Ned.
Yes.
Is that harvesting technique typical for Super Tuscan or just what they're doing?
I don't know if that's exactly normal for Super Tuscans. It's indicative of his sort of like spare no expense in order to make great wine approach. That's very much like he is willing to, you know, in a year that's not a great vintage, he's totally willing to just not make wine, to just dump it all out, you know, or like sell it off and not put his name on it and just sell it in bulk or something. Like he's willing to go to, you know, practically any lengths in order to have the most healthy grapes possible to make really beautiful wine. And that, you know, having that level of manual labor, having people go through the vineyard over and over and over again and really harvest cluster by cluster. I don't know how many other wineries are doing it that way, but that is sort of, I don't know, not a hallmark of Super Tuscans, but yeah, the real Super Tuscans, the things that are $100 a bottle. Usually the people making them are kind of like, yes, I want my wine to be really, really, really fancy. I want this to be the, you know, the Ferrari of wines, and I am willing to do whatever it takes. So I'm going to, you know, produce a ridiculously small amount of wine per acre, and I'm going to, yeah, be willing to use whatever that was, a diastolic pump that doesn't use an impeller so that it doesn't like beat the wine up at all. All these little things that add up. Intentionally now for wine number 4, I'm going to the Alta Maremma. So this is totally different. So, you know, the Le Coupole is, I think, legitimately really cool, but in a way, like big, impressive, like show off Bordeaux grape, Super Tuscan, like that is an echo of what happened in Tuscany in the 70s and 80s. The I Forestieri Girotondo is sort of like where Tuscany is going now, or where, you know, wine in general is going right now. So back to screen share. So this is made by these guys here in the Alta Maremma. This is Dario Marinari what's his name? And Ezekiel Alasia, who's from Argentina. Both of them ended up working at Ampalaya, which is here in the Tuscan Maremma, and Ampalaya is sort of a famous like natural winery here in the Maremma, in the Tuscan coast. And then these guys started their own like little project, trying to recover, trying to find old vineyards out in the hills, a lot of old clones of grapes, a lot of old varieties like Aliatico and stuff like that. The Maremma, the hills on the coast of Tuscany are more complicated. There's schistous clay, but there's also like sand and marn, and you get like there's definitely more stuff here. It's more complicated. It's generally a little bit lower, a little bit more not like damp, but there's more influence from the ocean. This is mostly Sangiovese. Sangiovese co-fermented with a little bit of like Trebiano, Malvasia. Oh, right, and Sonica. They have Ansonica here too. This is 11.5% alcohol. This part of Tuscany, the coast that's right down by, closer to the water, this hill, like dry, sun-baked rolling hills, is more like Provence. Brighter, more supple. It smells more aromatically like herbaceous in a way to me. Like it reminds me sort of the garrigue of Provence, like Provençal red wines. Like it sort of reminds me of like sage and rosemary and stuff like that. And I haven't been here to this part of Tuscany, but it really, like, now tasting all of these wines and having that be one of the differences, the differentiating characteristics of this wine compared to the other more inland parts of Tuscany, it really makes me sort of wonder and want to go visit here to see what it smells like. Short maceration in concrete. Yeah, what's that, 10 kilometers, so maybe 20 kilometers to the ocean from where they are here.
Ned, do you have other wines from their portfolio?
I've gotten other, I know I've gotten the Regal Male. I don't think I've gotten any of the Rosado or the Rosso, but I think they just started making. I think that, like, this is a very new project, and the wines they just came into the country last year for the first time. So I just haven't really gotten a great chance to like taste through too many of their wines and get to know them too much beyond this yet. It's a nice, like, it's still got plenty of tannin, but it's got like a saltiness, and it's sort of brighter fruit. It's a little bit almost sort of strawberry flavors to it. All right, I'll stop screen share so that, all right, last wine. This is the Sanguinetto Vino Nobile di Montepolciano. And just super important for everybody out there. So there's Montepolciano, the grape variety, which is grown all over, primarily over in Abruzzo and stuff. This is Montepolciano, the town, which is in southern Tuscany, which falls into the Chianti Coliaratini, Chianti appellation, but more specifically makes Vino Nobile de Montepolciano, which is really serious, old school, extended aging Sangiovese. So there's Montepolciano, the town, and this wine here that is named for that town. And then there is Montepolciano, the grape variety that's grown over in Abruzzo, and the two of them don't really have anything in common with each other. This is, I think, of all of the wines in the Devonish portfolio, the Sanguinetto wines are the most, if I was going to point to something as being like, this is Tuscany, like this represents classic, great Tuscan wine, this is it. Yes, screen share. And then, let's see. 2017, spring 2019. Let's see. Okay, so 2019, I went over and I visited Dora and stayed at Sanguinetto for a couple of days. I have a great picture of, there we go. Yeah, this is my favorite picture of Dora here. So Dora's father, I've forgotten her father's name, something Forsoni. He was actually from Umbria, from I think somewhere not too far outside of Spoleto, and bought this land over here in Tuscany, in southern Tuscany, in 1958. Dora is his youngest daughter. Dora is the youngest of 9 children. So she, like she grew up, she went over, so she grew up here at this farm. And this is, boy, when he bought it, it was like 30 something hectares. And today it's like, she has like 50 hectares here in southern Tuscany. Only 6 of them are vines. Most of it is empty. Most of it is either just like empty rolling hills, or it's, farmed to other things, either by them or just rented out to other people to like farm vegetables, to farm grains, stuff like that. She has 6 hectares of vines here. She moved away, did other things, but then then she came back and he passed away, and she took over winemaking here. Oh, that's her old Alfa Romeo there. Anyway, there she is in the cellar. Lots of old concrete tanks. This is like just up the road from the winery. Some olive trees. You can see it's like it's a dark, sort of like dry clay soil. That's the winery right there, sort of up exposed on this hillside. That's the winery. This is 100, not 100% Sangiovese. This is Sangiovese with Canaiolo and Momolo, 2 indigenous local blending grapes blended into it. It's about 90% Sangiovese. which here around Montepolciano they call Prugnolo Gentile. And this is aged in these big oak casks for 2 years before release. So the soil here, so she classically, she believes that Vino Nobile di Montepolciano should always be made from this dark, redder soil, and this is part of where the Sanguinetto winery gets its name. That the soil here, you know, is red like blood, like it's been stained by blood. Is the story. There's also we went out and we walked around the vineyard. I don't know. Oh yeah, okay. So then this is soil that's like whiter clay. And she was like, that's not okay. Like that's not what you should grow Sangiovese on for Vino Nobile di Montepolciano. So she has white grapes that she grows on that. She has like Trebiano, Malvasia, and I've forgotten something else that she had like a bunch of slang names for. So she has white grapes planted on some of these white clay soils. But yeah, and then here's, you can see, so there's the red clay up there, and then right here in the foreground is the paler white clay. The vineyard stops there on the clay, the red clay. Oh yeah, there I am tasting some of the soil. I ran back and I ran all around Montepolciano, Vino Nobile di Montepolciano. Let me actually just look at the map here. It's actually a very small appellation. Let's see, how big is that? That's like maybe 5 miles across, something like that. 5, maybe 6 miles at the most, at its most wide. It's all hilly. It's, you know, generally like warm, dry, long summer and autumn, and then it starts raining at some point, like later in the autumn. The rainy season starts sort of at like just about the beginning of winter. But this is a pretty small place, Vino Nobile di Montepolciano. So when I was here staying with her, I ran all back and forth around from where she is in Acquaviva over to Montepolciano and stuff. This is the view from the winery, looking sort of down over the plain. So 2018 was a really pretty great year here. This is 14% alcohol. She fed me all, she's a huge hunter. She fed me all kinds of game birds that she had shot and stuff. And then she was demonstrating, she was saying that, you know, like her wine, if you pour a few drops on a napkin, it stains the, you know, the whole spot that it makes is red. And she was like, you can tell the winemakers that add water to their wine to stretch it out, you know, or to like whatever to water it down to have more of it. You can tell because when you put drops of it on a napkin, there's like an edge, there's like a nail around the edge of it. It doesn't have as much pigment. Those are her vineyards down there. You can see the red soil. This is sort of like looking out from the winery. Lots of rosemary is planted everywhere. Wine storage. And Dora. So she's been here most of her life, and she really, like, Dora and Sanguinetto you know, like she is extremely proud of this land and the wine, and does everything to a very, very high level of quality. I was asking her if she does anything different between her Rosso di Montalcino, Vino Nobile di Montepolciano, and then she makes a Vino Nobile di Montepolciano Reserva. And she was like, no, I don't do anything different. I farm all the vineyards the same way. I do everything the same. The only difference is that, you know, once the wine is done, once it's through its primary fermentation, she decides which barrels will become Vino Nobile de Montepolciano, and the only difference is that it's aged longer. She ages the Rosso de Montepolciano for a year in cask, and the Vino Nobile she ages for 2 years. The legal requirement is 1 year, but so she ages it for 2. The Reserva she ages for 3, and it's really just a barrel selection based on what she thinks, you know, makes sense. You know, what has the, which ones have the structure and power to be aged that long and have it work out for them. But she's making all of it to the same standards. It's not like she's farming some vineyards for Vino Nobile and some for Rosso. Basically, she's all the vines, all the Sangiovese she grows, she is growing it with the intention of making, you know, Vino Nobile de Montepolciano from it. It's riper, it's lush. It makes me think of, you know, cigar box. It makes me think of that like cedar, like spicy aromatic cigar box, a little bit of tobacco. Definitely like cherry, dried cherry. This is super, super classic Sangiovese. Rich, ripe, sweet fruits on the palate. The finish has got more like dried cherry, lingers for a long time. And this, it's tannic, but you don't taste the tannins that much. The tannins are not as aggressive, A, because the wine has been aged longer, but also B, because there's so much flavor here at the same time. There's so much else happening. And at the same time, this is 14% alcohol, but it has lovely acidity. It keeps the wine fun and bright. It's just a really gorgeously well put together old school wine. And it helps that this is really a very good vintage for it. But this, you know, this wine is sort of like my go-to for like the most beautiful, classic, impressive expression of what Sangiovese and Tuscany can do. This and her Rosso de Montepolciano, but that's out of stock right now. We have like a pallet and a half of it that's on the way from Italy right now. So, yeah, I just feel super, super lucky that I get to work with these wines. It's been a while. I've been working with them for, I don't know, for a relatively long time, but then also B, that I actually got to go and stay with Dora and hang out with her and talk to her and like go drink espresso with her and just, you know, like have dinner and spend a bunch of days just hanging out with her. And then whatever, it's neither here nor there, but it was when I went back this last autumn in 2021, I didn't tell her at all without any warning. I just drove over from Rome. I drove up here to Montepolciano and I found a sunflower on the side of the road and I just showed up out of nowhere and just surprised her with a sunflower. And I was driving another like Abarth, you know, Cinquecento. They're loud. So I pulled into the parking lot and she heard me and came out of the winery with this look like, who is here? Who's here to bother me? And I jumped out of the car and was like, hi, Dara, I brought you a flower. And she was just like, Ned, what are you doing here? And so we hung out for like half an hour and drank some Vinsanto and stuff. And that was that. And then I headed off. But she's a really lovely sort of, I don't know, salt of the earth, like person who has like kept really classic traditional winemaking alive in this part of Tuscany. The wines are delicious and they are fantastic values, and they're also really important to me for sort of what they are, what they represent, and everything. That's Tuscany. That's as much as I could jam into an hour and 20 minutes here of Tuscany and 5 wines. Tuscany does make all kinds of cool whites. There's a lot of cool Trebiano. Trebiano actually has a terrible reputation, and for a long time was overproduced and just made like insipid, boring, nothing white wines. But Trebiano can make really excellent, interesting wines if you don't overproduce it, and also, with like a little bit of skin contact and stuff. And so anyway, there's starting to be some really cool, tasty, salty, minerally Trebbianos, and there's great Malvazias, and then there's Vinsanto, and there's just so much from Tuscany. So anyway, thanks a lot. Have a great afternoon. I'll see you all next week. Bye, everybody.